Coming up, I'll discuss the impact of Hurricane Milton and ask why the government seems chronically ineffective in providing basic and proper assistance. I'll evaluate Kamala Harris's tour to improve her image. It's not working, and January 6th political prisoner Tim Hale, who spent 3 years in prison, joins me. We're going to talk about life in the DC Gulag and solitary confinement. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
I'd like to mention that today we are basically launching the DVDs for Vindicating Trump. The DVDs will be shipped out starting on Monday, and so great time to order them. The movie is still in some theaters. This weekend it'll be down to maybe 50 or 60 theaters, so it's a much smaller number than we started with. That's fairly normal. Movies these days don't stay in theaters all that long. We've already been in for 2 full weeks, so this will be our 3rd week. There's still places to see it. And if you want to see it in a theater, and if there happens to be a theater near you, definitely go. But if not, we are pivoting to the streaming, which will open up next week, and the DVDs, which I say are ready to go, ready to be shipped out. And get a bunch. By that I mean get one for yourself. You own the film. But it's a great way to gift it, to give it to someone who would benefit from it, who would either enjoy it because they're a Trumpster and it'll make the case and fire them up and get them to be more active. But also if you know someone who's kind of like a wavering Republican, I don't know about Trump, he needs to stop doing this, he needs to stop doing that. Well, this is the type of guy that needs to see the film because it is a defense not just of Trump's policies, it does do that, but it's also a defense of Trump the man. It's a character defense of Trump. So that's it on the DVDs. The website, by the way, vindicatingtrump.com, that's like the one-stop shop. The book's also out. You can order it off the website or you can get it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Now, one of the things that may have hurt us a little bit in the theater, and this is one of those things you can't predict, is 2 back-to-back hurricanes. And 2 hurricanes that have swept across, well, I would have to say kind of red America. By that I mean Florida and North Carolina and Tennessee. And of course, we have now had the second strike by Hurricane Milton, a hurricane that maybe was a little bit less ferocious than it was anticipated to be. Debbie's sort of a hurricane follower, and we're going to discuss hurricanes a little bit more also tomorrow on Friday's podcast. But Debbie has noted that on the Weather Channel these days, they typically have these like climate change maniacs. The climate change movement has insinuated itself into the meteorological community. And so you've got all these fresh-faced meteorologist goofballs. And I say goofballs because while they do understand weather, I don't know if they understand history. And by that I mean, do they have any real awareness? I mean, let's look at it this way. Let's just say that the intensity of hurricanes was caused by carbon, by man-introduced carbon into the atmosphere. Let's take their hypothesis as true. What would you expect to see? Well, you'd expect to see, going back to the Industrial Revolution, which let us roughly date at, let's say, 1840, we have obviously a kind of increasing trajectory of carbon being injected into the air, man-made carbon. And so what would we expect to find? We would expect to find a kind of upward trend of hurricanes. In other words, more hurricanes that you see in 1860 than in 1840, more in 1880 than in 1860, more in 1900 than in 1880, and on and on. In other words, a kind of upward slope of hurricanes, not a zigzag pattern, but rather a continuing increase that matches, roughly speaking, the increasing injection of man-made carbon into the atmosphere. Is that, in fact, what we see? No. In fact, all you have to do is just look at the hurricane pattern, and it's a little tricky because hurricanes are named a little differently than they used to be. But the bottom line of it is, are the most severe hurricanes that we're seeing now, are they the most severe that we've seen in the last 150 years? No. Are they the most numerous? No. And so this pattern that would be predicted according to the doctrine that says that human beings are the cause of all this is simply not borne out by the historical facts. Yeah, there are severe hurricanes. Obviously, if you were born yesterday, wow, this is the worst hurricane I've ever seen. Yeah, that's true because you were born yesterday. But if you had been around in earlier years, and Debbie can give you like chapter and verse on this, but if you were around for the great hurricane over here and the great hurricane over there, you wouldn't say such stupid things. And yet, as I say, this is the underlying premise of these meteorologists on the Weather Channel. They're like, things are much more violent. Get ready for more violent hurricanes. And then I noticed that pretty much time and time again, well, part of it, of course, could just be media sensationalism, right? You have the guy who's like shaking, the hurricane is throwing him forward and backward and so on. But then they come out and you see that they predicted 15-foot waves, 15-foot storm surge. Well, the actual storm surge was like 6 feet. And then you would expect them to go back and go, oh, well, maybe the hurricane wasn't quite as violent as we said 3 days ago. And all the hype that we put into that about, oh, the hurricanes are more violent than ever, that has to be now modified because, quite honestly, a 6-foot surge, while pretty bad, isn't all that bad. It's pretty normal for hurricanes that are Category 3 or Category 4, and those hurricanes do happen, and they've happened before, and they've happened a long time ago, no less than they happened 30 years ago, no less than they happened today. And so all of this is, see, what they don't want to do is put their original hypothesis into question. And that tells you right there that you're dealing with an unscientific theory. Why? Because a scientific theory welcomes refutation. A scientific theory says, I got 2 parts of hydrogen, I got 1 part of oxygen, let's watch. I need to get water. If I get water, then H2O is in fact water. If I get something else, my theory doesn't really work. And I noticed that with regard to climate change and the number and intensity of hurricanes, I want to see very clearly what the hypothesis is, and then I want to see if it's borne out by the data. And I will say that this hurricane has been, Milton, very devastating, lots of damage. It seems like the rescue efforts that have been organized by Ron DeSantis in Florida have been excellent. And it's really interesting to see the skirmish between Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris over all this, because she's trying to get in on the hurricane. And he really won't let her do it because he realizes, in fact, he said in one of the press conferences, he goes, listen, we've had a number of hurricanes in Florida over the past 4 years. He goes, I've never previously gotten a call from Kamala Harris. Suddenly she's trying to get me on the phone, but she hasn't shown any previous interest in hurricanes or disaster relief or wanting to be on the scene. In other words, all Kamala Harris's stuff is photogenic. It is theatrical. It's putting on a show. You might have seen recently, she's on the plane, she's apparently getting a sort of disaster briefing, right? She's got her earbuds and she's supposedly taking vigorous notes. Except all you have to do is kind of enlarge the picture and you'll see that, first of all, her notepad is completely blank. She's not taking any notes. She's pretending to take notes. And second of all, her phone is sitting on the desk and her earbuds are not connected to the phone. Nothing is connected to the phone. So she's pretending to engage in a briefing, but there is no briefing. What is it? It's basically a photo op. And in a way that summarizes our whole election, we've basically got a smoke and mirrors candidate who is empty-headed, is even known to be vacuous by her own team. They were apparently having a debate, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the next segment, about which is better. Should we send the empty head out to a few friendly talk shows which will coddle her, give her the questions in advance, create scenarios where people will sympathize with her? Should we do that? Or should we not send her out at all? Think of it. The third option was rejected out of hand. Should we send her on to places where she may get tough questions, where she may be asked to comment on things that are occurring internationally? The idea is we have an idiot in our hands, so we can't consider that option. That option is like off the table right away. So either we send her out to the friendlies where they will do a song and dance routine around her, or we will just basically keep her in hiding and rely on all kinds of other schemes to get her across the finish line. Finally, I think that one of the lessons we've learned from these two hurricanes is that FEMA is a complete disaster. FEMA itself is a disaster zone. FEMA itself needs to be cleaned out. FEMA itself needs relief. And by relief, I mean someone to go in there and clean up the place. This place is terribly infected with DEI. And they have all kinds of stuff where they've been talking about the fact that we need to have equity in disaster relief. Equity in disaster relief? What are you talking about? Why don't you just help the people who need help the most? But no, apparently ideology has to creep in there as well. FEMA has also diverted massive amounts of resources to illegals. Now, illegals are a disaster in one sense, but it is a disaster that Debbie says it's a man-made disaster. You invited the illegals over, so that's hardly an emergency in the normal sense of a natural disaster. That's what FEMA was created for, and so FEMA is being ransacked. Its purposes are being abused, and all of this shows that we've learned over the past several years that these government agencies, one after the other, from the NIH to the CDC to the FBI, they're not to be trusted. And we can now add FEMA to that list. Look at these massive tax hikes proposed by Kamala Harris, an almost 40% top income tax rate, 7% increase to the corporate tax, a capital gains tax on unrealized gains. Add up all these tax and spend proposals, they could add almost $2 trillion to a current $2 trillion deficit. You might be thinking, hey, it's time to make more of your savings tax sheltered and inflation sheltered. Well, this is where the people at Birch Gold Group can help you. Birch Gold will assist you in converting an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. Here's some good news. You don't pay a penny out of pocket. Just text the word Dinesh to 989898. That'll get you started. That will get you a free information kit on gold. No obligation, just information. It'll help you fortify your savings before the crazy really hits. Birch Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. Thousands of happy customers like Debbie and me. So contact Birch Gold. Text Dinesh to the number 989898 for your free information kit today. The radical left is working overtime to gain control of the Supreme Court. They want to end lifetime tenure so they can end the court's conservative majority. Well, we've seen this script before. Remember when Hugo Chavez reformed Venezuela's Supreme Court? Debbie and I have had this discussion many times. She's warned me about Chavez's destruction of Venezuela by destroying the court. After that, he never lost a ruling or an election because he packed the court, and that ensured that Venezuela would never be a free or capitalist country again. Now, more than a decade after his death, Venezuela is still in tyranny and chaos. So we can't let that happen here. If we lose the court, we lose the country. And that's why my friends at First Liberty are fighting to save the court. And you can help them. To win the fight, they need 1 million patriots like you to join them. How do you join? Learn more at supremecoup.com. That's supremecoup.com/Dinesh. I want to talk about the Kamala Harris media tour, such as it is. And kind of the best way to think about it, I don't know if you've seen the movie. It is It involves this guy named Chance the Gardener. Honey, do you remember the name of this movie with Peter Sellers? Being There. That's it. That's the movie. It's called Being There. And I'll tell you the plot of the movie. You basically have this guy, and he is a little bit retarded, a little bit slow. He's a gardener by profession. His name is Chance. And he speaks in a very slow, measured way. And what he says, well, let's just say it's sort of like at the first grade level. Things like, a garden is a garden. A garden needs attention. I provide the attention that a garden needs in order to be a garden. So this is Chance the Gardener. And the movie is a comedy because by a peculiar twist of circumstances, this guy, played by Peter Sellers, finds himself in very important settings where he utters things that are absolutely idiotic and senseless. But other people take them to be unbelievably profound. They ask him a question about life. He starts talking about growing vegetables, and the people go, "Oh wow! What you're really saying is that life is a form of planting seeds." And so, in other words, this is the comedy here is that the audience is fully aware that you're dealing with this kind of well-meaning dunce. But at one point he meets this guy who's like a major financial tycoon, and they're talking about business, and of course Chance is saying nothing because he knows nothing about business. And finally the guy refers to a balance sheet, and Chance goes, "What's a balance sheet?" And the guy goes, "Exactly." In other words, what he's getting at is balance sheets don't really tell you what a business is worth or how it's really functioning. So the business tycoon interprets Chance's very pedestrian statement in a sort of elevated terms. Now, with Kamala Harris, it's not quite the same thing. Yes, she is basically a feminine version of Chance the Gardener. She's essentially a kind of retarded or low IQ individual. Let's put it that way. It's putting it kind of mildly. I think anyone in the world looking in can see it's an utter disgrace that this person is running for president of the United States. It speaks badly of the whole country. And to some degree, it speaks badly of the IQ of the country that this is even a close race. It's not a good sign. I slightly excuse what's going on by saying that there are lots of people in this country who get nothing other than the propagandistic diet of the media. And so what else are they to believe? They're not exposed to conservative media. And so as a result, they're pummeled. And what they get is, you could call it manufactured facts. And it's worth thinking about how people come to believe that a fact is true. It could be any fact. Climate change, fascism is on the right. How do you believe those things? Well, you believe these things because you hear them or see them more than one place. And because you see them in more than one place, you think that there are independent sources of authority that are telling you this is true, and therefore it has to be true. Let's remember, in life, we're not able to verify everything for ourselves. Do I believe there's a place called Papua New Guinea? Yeah. Have I been there? No. Well, how do I know it's there? Well, the answer is my geography teacher said so. I saw it on a map. They were talking about, Debbie and I saw a documentary about health, and they were interviewing some people who said they were from Papua New Guinea. So I say, okay, well, I see it over here. I see it over there. It's got to be true. There has to be a place called Papua New Guinea because all these people can't be lying. And similarly, in politics, what happens is you see something in Barnes & Noble, some professor wrote about it, and then it's on the History Channel. There it is. They're talking about it in The View. And so the ordinary guy goes, well, it has to be true because I saw it over here, I saw it over there, not realizing that it is the same, as I put it differently elsewhere, it's the same bullet bouncing from one wall to the other, and you think it's multiple independent sources of authority. No, it's not. It's coming from the same team. It is the same kind of propaganda that you're being fed with, and because you're getting it over here and over there and over here, you think it's gotta be true. Now, with Kamala Harris, something very interesting is going on. And that is, even though she's getting this lionized treatment, I mean, I've seen basically she's on Colbert. And, Colbert is doing his best to make her seem cool. In fact, at one point, they both pop open a beer. Remember, this is like the Elizabeth Warren tactic where she's like, she wanted to seem normal. And so she's like, hey, she's trying to have a beer with her husband, but because she's such a freak and an abnormal person, she acts as though her husband is, quote, visiting her at her own house. Thank you for stopping by. Stopping by, he lives there. Let's have a beer together. Yes, perhaps we should. And so there's this artificiality to it. And even though it's all intended to be very normal, a bunch of guys around a truck having a beer, there's something fake if you really watch it. And of course, Kamala is a massive fake because every time she takes a sip, she has hysterical laughter. And so the whole thing is just downright creepy. Then she goes on The View, and just think of how abysmally dumb this woman is. They ask her this question: what would you were on with Biden for the past 4 years. Which parts of his policies did you agree with? And she instinctively, she commits what in politics is called a gaffe. And a gaffe can be defined as when a politician accidentally tells the truth. And that is, she goes, I agreed with all of them. Right away, you're like, wait, you're running a campaign whose premise is that you didn't agree with Joe Biden. You didn't agree with him about guns. In fact, you own a gun, supposedly. You didn't agree with him about the border. In fact, you're going to be really tough on the border, unlike Biden. Now you're telling us you agreed with all of it. So this was a case where, again, Kamala Harris sort of blurts out the truth by mistake. And anyone listening would be like, well, okay, so then if I like the direction of the country, I should vote for you. But if I don't like the way things are going, well, you are part of the existing regime. You are on board with everything that they said and all the policies they pursued by your own admission. So this is Kamala Harris. And then on 60 Minutes, she is asked a question. Well, some of the stuff that they put out was suitably nonsensical, just what you would expect. But apparently on Israel, her answer was even stupider than her normal low standard. And so CBS was like, ooh, we have to fix this. Now just think about this, because normally you're a media organization, right? And so you can't help it if the candidate is an idiot. You had an interview, you tried to throw softballs, and you're like, okay, we got to put it out there. No. CBS goes, we need to fix it. And so what do? They go into the video, they delete her answer, the answer she actually gave. They take some sentences from another part of the interview, from a different question, and they move those to the answer on Israel to make her seem intelligent. And unfortunately, they got busted. Not unfortunately, it's actually fortunately. Fortunately, we actually know that 60 Minutes is not a real journalistic organization, but rather an extension of the Democratic National Committee. They're like a wing of the DNC, and they're running straight out propaganda for Kamala Harris. And again, let's be grateful for a platform like X, because if we didn't have X, what would have happened on YouTube and on Google and on Facebook? They would have just created propaganda. In fact, they would have had fact checkers say, no, CBS did not do that. A spokesman for CBS says that is a misrepresentation of the situation. The problem with X is that you have the original interview and you have the edited version. Case closed. There it is. See it for yourself. It is right in front of you and impossible to deny when the video is made available in both cases. So this is Kamala Harris. I think the silver lining of all this, I mean, you would hope that the ordinary guy would be like, well, I see Kamala Harris is on The View. Why isn't Trump on The View? I see Kamala Harris is being interviewed by Colbert. Why wasn't Trump interviewed by Colbert? But people generally don't think quite that way. They don't figure that out. But what they do figure out is once they take a look at Kamala Harris, they go, wow, man, they're really trying to make her look good. But there's something a little freaky about this person. Now, I don't know if Tim Walz is even freakier, because go back and look at the video of Tim Walz on the football field. Most of us on football fields have spotted a mascot, right? And I can imagine if I was 5 years old and I saw a mascot, I would start jumping up and down. I would be extremely excited. I would go hug the mascot. I would then pretend to hug the air. I would make victory signs and do somersaults. But I wouldn't do that at the age of 60, because there's something ridiculous about not just a grown man, but a relatively elderly man acting like a 5-year-old. But that's Tim Walz. And again, there are two possibilities. One is mentally he is a 5-year-old. That's one possibility. The other is he is putting on an act. His act is over exuberance. And we've all met people like this. Exuberance is generally a good thing for people to get excited. But if people get extremely excited about things that are very basic, then something is a little wrong. And that's the impression that you get with Tim Walz. I suspect that he is ultimately just putting on this over-the-top, aw shucks image to try to seem normal. He's not really normal, but he's trying to play at being normal, and he doesn't really know what normal looks like. So here you have Trump and you have J.D. Vance, and you can disagree with them on certain issues, but they're both authentic. They are not only authentic American stories, they're authentic American success stories. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are success stories of a different sort. They've kind of come up the governmental ladder. They have benefited from favors. They have benefited from leverage. They have cashed in, if you will, on politics to get them where they are. Hopefully, the American people will see very clearly that these are not the two people that we want running the country going forward. I want you to get your fruit and veggie supplements from Balance of Nature, but before you do, wait till you hear what I have to say. If you go to balanceofnature.com to buy their popular fruit and veggie supplements, fruits and veggies in a capsule, a discount offer will pop up. It may say 20 or 25% off your first order. Well, don't click that. Why? Because if you use my code, you'll get 35% off your first order plus free shipping. And what's the code? It's America. Use the code and save big. Here's another bonus. Balance of Nature has a risk-free money-back guarantee. So go ahead and find out for yourself what I already know. There's no other product out there like Balance of Nature when it comes to fruit and veggie supplements. Whether you order online or call direct, you need to use promo code America to get the special offer, 35% off and free shipping. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751. Again, it's 800-246-8751, or go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you'll get 35% off and free shipping. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. Forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast Tim Hale. He's a comedian. He's an Army vet. He was also a peaceful protester on January 6th. And guess what? He spent a year in solitary confinement in the so-called DC Gulag, 3 years imprisoned. His family started Patriot Freedom Project to support the families of fellow defendants. And Tim is out now and raising awareness of the hardships of J6 families, clearing the names of prisoners left behind. By the way, the website, and I urge you to check it out and to donate, patriotfreedomproject.com. You can follow him on social media. Apparently, Tim has some aristocratic pretensions. His social media on X is Louis, Louis. Don't say it as Louis. Louis of Monmouth. Monmouth. Tim, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Kind of expected you to be in your aristocratic outfit, but looks like you've got the... Do you have the Make America Great Again hat or the January 6th hat on? And but welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me. Let me begin this way, because we've now been a little distance from January 6th. And I think for some people, probably not for people still in prison, but they're looking at January 6th kind of in the rear view mirror. And maybe what they're asking is like, what is the significance of that event? What is the lesson of it going forward? I mean, you've had a lot of time to think about this kind of stuff as a participant, as an activist. Well, how would you answer that question?
Well, sure. Well, first of all, sir, I'd just like to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for having me on. I know this has been a long time coming. It's been many years since you yourself, and I want everybody to know this. The D'Souza family is extremely generous. And so the first major contributor Patriot Freedom Project had was Dinesh D'Souza. And the first contribution, the contribution he made has helped a lot of defendants and their families. And so I don't want anybody in the world to ever not be aware of how truly generous you are, sir. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And on behalf of the men I had to leave behind who can't speak for themselves, thank you so much for the advocacy you've engaged in and your generosity. Thank you very much. You're a true Christian man. To answer your question, sir, January 6th, it was a large event, but it's important people remember that this wasn't the first and it won't be the last time that the government has engaged in this sort of political inquisition. For those who recall, the Michigan kidnapping plot with Governor Whitmer was a setup. The Wolverine Watchmen were set up, and it was almost sort of, I would say, sort of a prototype for what would come on January 6th. And we've seen sort of little glow in the dark events since then. I think the takeaway from January 6th is that we've reached a point in American history where our own government thinks that it's its prerogative to entrap potentially a third of its own population and then to treat them as political prisoners. This isn't the Russian Empire under the czars. This isn't the decadence of Rome. This is now the United States of America. And so the Bill of Rights, the 14th Amendment, and equal protection under the law, everything we hold sacred as American citizens, I feel truly is under fire. And it's important, though you are correct, sir, that people want this in the rearview mirror. Democrats just want to wipe it away as an insurrection, though we know it was a Fedsurrection. And I think even those on the right want to sort of move past it because they don't want to address it because it's politically inconvenient. But what I find, sir, is that the more people learn about it, the more the generosity of people like yourself truly shines through. I think that as American citizens, we should never be afraid to address controversy, and we should never be so scared of retaliation from the state that we're willing to leave behind our fellow citizens. And I think that's really the takeaway of January 6th. People turned in their coworkers, their families. It's one of the most disturbing things in my lifetime to see. I remember a time when we could peacefully disagree with one another, but now I think truly everyone has a dagger at each other's backs.
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about, Debbie and I were delighted to help. It's the least that we can do. And I think it's guys like you who have done, serious and disproportionate time, is putting it mildly. The idea that whatever you did, and I'm going to get to what you did and what you said. You made some over-the-top comments, to be sure, but so what? Who cares? The point is, this kind of incarceration is normally reserved for pretty serious crimes, and I think what you're saying, which I want to probe a little bit further, is we're not experiencing tyranny over a whole society. Under, let's say, Stalin's Russia, any Soviet citizen could be corralled at the railway station and then taken away, never to be seen again. I think what you're saying is we are seeing partial tyranny, which is to say that we are seeing one party, the Democrats, and the accompanying regime, which includes the police agencies of government and the media, targeting a fairly large segment on the other side. Not all Republicans, right? In other words, there are a lot of Republicans like Mitch McConnell never has to worry about the FBI showing up at his door. That's never going to happen. But for a substantial number of Republicans, mainly Trump supporters, they are in the sights of this regime, and which does not hesitate to dole out tyrannical treatment, one-sided justice, selective prosecution. Is that a fair summary of what you were trying to say?
It's absolutely right, Dinesh. And, I would say I was a history major. And so one thing that always catches my eye is that in the past, the FBI might have targeted the left. They might have targeted anti-war protesters, the civil rights movement, even the labor movement. But the pendulum can always swing back in the other direction. So for those on the other side who don't care about the so-called insurrectionists, who don't care about Trump supporters being targeted by the feds, I would say this could always happen to you. The pendulum could always swing back in the other direction, and because the feds infiltrate every organic movement there is. So, but yes, as of right now, it seems whether it just be Trump supporters protesting at the Capitol with American flags, people like myself who walked in the Capitol in a suit and tie waving an American flag, or whether it be comedians, who are politically incorrect, or whether it be school board meetings, parents who are concerned about their kids, infiltration of Catholic churches. It just seems to be that every sector of American society that truly forms the foundations of our civilization is being targeted. It's the most productive members of society. It's the people who make America great in and of itself that are being targeted. And so, yeah, I would say it's not so much the Republican establishment that's being targeted, but it is the dissident right, the people who are just fed up with not having a voice. And so it's not good enough that we've never had a voice. We also need to be beaten into submission and even held in solitary confinement to keep us quiet. Yes, sir.
What do you think, if I think back to the Whitmer kidnapping, there's a lot of evidence. In fact, we're not saying this. This is something that juries have acquitted a number of those defendants in the belief that they were framed, that they were set up, that there were just as many, if not more, FBI agents and informants in the so-called kidnapping scheme. Not to mention the fact that Governor Whitmer already knew about the kidnapping scheme. She was working with the feds from the beginning. Then she has a bogus press conference where she pretends like, oh, they were out to kidnap me. So all of this has come out now, and we're aware of it. And the motive of it seems to be clear. And that is that they wanted to have a press conference before the election in which they said, here are the MAGA enemies of democracy. Here are the violent extremists. These are the kind of people you need to vote against and keep their leader Trump away from the Oval Office. So it was a politically motivated scheme. What was the motivation of orchestrating January 6th?
Well, that's multifaceted, and I would say this, sir. You're absolutely right. It's not just a theory that the Fednapping plot was entrapment. A significant portion of that group turned out to be federal informants, and the same is true for January 6th. Though this goes seldom said. I was actually incarcerated with several defendants who admitted that they were crisis actors. They went to the Capitol to get out of drug conspiracy charges from the year before. Nobody knows about this. This is something that the government keeps under wraps, but they had a significant number of CHSs, or confidential human sources, to incite the crowd or to collect incriminating evidence against potential defendants. Now, I would say that this is kind of convoluted. It might seem this way, but I believe January 6th was a false flag or a color revolution meant to distract from the debate that they were supposed to have inside of the Capitol. By inciting a riot, they were able to completely sidestep that inquiry. And then, of course, by sabotaging the 2020 election and doing that on January 6th, if Trump ever ran again, so lo and behold, they're prosecuting him for January 6th. So they were able to sabotage his efforts in 2024. I think this was a long game, and I think that they had I I think that it's more complicated than most people think. And keep in mind, I'm not sure if you're familiar with 18 USC 1512, but there was a statute that was modified after the Enron scandal with a substatute, and this substatute was called obstruction of an official proceeding. This was used to essentially charge multiple January 6 defendants, accusing them of obstructing the proceedings of Congress on January 6. It was a nonsense charge, and recently, thankfully, the Supreme Court tossed out the charge as inapplicable, overly broad. But this charge was actually used against President Trump. So I believe that will probably be vacated in his case as well. But the interesting thing is that the first defendants to have 18 USC 1512 upheld regarding January 6 were federal informants. And the judge who upheld it, I believe it was Dabney Friedrich, her husband was actually on the Enron task force, which was, of course, the scandal that led to that substatute being added in the first place. There are a lot of weird coincidences. And so I would believe that there is sort of a cross-contamination between the branches of government in order to target President Trump and keep him out of office. I don't think that's that controversial. But when you look at, for instance, on January 6th itself, you had the Metro Police and Capitol Police. They had undercover units there. We have video of them in plain clothes. You have FBI agents who are cheering on the crowd as they, breach through barriers or head up to the Capitol. You had representatives from pretty much every three-letter agency there. And despite what people might think, I'm sure some people have heard of the name Ray Epps by now. But Ray Epps was one man. There were plenty of people in the crowd who were working with him in a targeted fashion. There were absolutely federal informants. There were undercover assets there that day. And there were people on bullhorns and so on who were agitating the crowd and trying to incite them to break the law, most of which either got a slap on the wrist or never got prosecuted at all. I think January 6th was a clear, I would say it was an intelligence operation more than anything.
Let's take a pause. When we come back, more with Army veteran and comedian Tim Hale. Mike Lindell is a really good guy, and he has a heart of gold. Mike and MyPillow love giving back to those in need. They just sent a truckload of 14,000 MyPillows to those impacted by Hurricane Helene. But even though Mike loves to give back, a large retail store just canceled a huge order that had already left the warehouse. And so besides giving to those in need, Mike wants to pass some big savings directly on to you. For the first time ever, you can get a standard classic MyPillow for wholesale prices, just $14.88. Wow. But it gets better. For a limited time, you get the entire classic collection at wholesale prices. Get queen-size MyPillows, $18.88. Upgrade to a king for only $1 more. Get the body pillows for $29.88. Multi-use MyPillows for just $9.88. Here's the number to call, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. When you use promo code Dinesh, you can take advantage of wholesale pricing for the first time ever. And on top of that, get free shipping for orders over $75. These deals have never been offered this low before. Once again, go to mypillow.com. Use promo code Dinesh to get the standard MyPillow, just $14.88, the lowest price ever. Limited quantities at this price. Once they're gone, they're gone. I'm back with Army vet and comedian Tim Hale. Follow him on X at Lewis of Monmouth, MONMOUTH. The website, patriotfreedomproject.com. Tim, there's a further thing that jumps to mind about January 6th, and that is the fact that almost minutes after this erupted, I noticed the media almost uniformly using the word insurrection. Now, it's kind of a interesting, almost archaic word, and I remember it striking me at the time, and only later did I realize, this happens to be a word in the 14th Amendment. And in the 14th Amendment, it says that if somebody who attempts to foment an insurrection against the U.S. government cannot be allowed to run for office. It's almost as if the memo went out, let's start calling this an insurrection. Admittedly, there's no one inside the Capitol who has any arms. Admittedly, the only person who is, in a sense, killed or clearly killed is Ashley Babbitt. She's a Trump supporter. You can also make a case for Roseanne Boyland and others. And yet, it is the protesters who are supposedly insurrectionists, and Trump is supposedly the insurrection leader. I mean, It looks like you've got some pretty diabolical people who are thinking this stuff way out in advance. And Republicans, it seems, don't really think quite in this, at least not in this diabolically strategic way. Do you agree?
I would. I would say, sir, Dinesh, I wouldn't be surprised that there were elements within GOP leadership who were involved with Democratic leadership to do this. I frankly would not be surprised. There have been few Republicans in terms of our representatives who actually had the courage to speak out about this sort of thing. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, Louis Gohmert, they're actually the ones who visited us inside of the Gulag in DC. But, you're right about the analysis of the 14th Amendment. And what's interesting is that in order to utilize that clause, they had to violate the Equal Protection Clause. As well as I do, an insurrection is an armed rebellion. As you just mentioned, there was really nobody there with firearms. The few people that got charged for anything relating to firearms, what's interesting is that there was one man who dropped a holster with a gun in it, and he got probation. They didn't care. There was another man named John Banuelos. They waited 3 years to prosecute him for firing a firearm in DC. And lo and behold, they knew about him for 3 years. He was involved in a stabbing murder out in Utah. They didn't seem to care. It was only when I believe the fellow defendants brought attention to this and it got a little attention in the media. Suddenly they charged him, but they didn't care and they knew about him. So it seems to me that this armed insurrection narrative is purely astroturf. You are correct. It does seem like they just sent out a memo and everybody went lock and step. But I think that's more of a reflection of the. I think it's sort of an Operation Mockingbird sort of thing. I don't think there's any. Does anybody not believe that the mainstream media today is lock and step with the Democratic Party? It's just a media organ of the DNC. And so, yeah, I certainly agree that this insurrection narrative, the Philippine insurrection was essentially a war between the Americans and the Filipinos after the Spanish-American War. That was an insurrection. The Civil War, where 800,000 people died, that was an insurrection. But this is atrocity propaganda. This is the worst day since 9/11. This is Pearl Harbor. It's pure atrocity propaganda. And it's worked for some, but I'm grateful that, after these few years, I don't think most people believe it at all. Most.
Yeah, I think you're right. Although I also agree with you that the mainstream of the GOP leadership has been shamefully derelict. I mean, to me, it's kind of like leaving your own guys on the field. And for some of them, it may be that they themselves wanted to use the event against Trump. And that's partly why they acted in the way that they did. Tim, talk about, I fell afoul of the Obama administration with a campaign finance violation, but all I got was a confinement center. Kind of insightful in itself and a form of confinement. I couldn't really leave, but not the same thing as prison, and certainly not solitary confinement, which strikes me as just almost unbearable form of torture. Describe your experience and that of your fellow January 6th defendants in prison. What was that like, and how has it changed you?
Well, the first thing to say, it's really two things. And I think that this is imperative for citizens throughout the country to understand. Back in COVID, Washington, D.C. was worse than pretty much any deep blue state. And so when it came to the lockdowns, the jail in DC essentially had carte blanche to do whatever it wanted. And so it kept us in solitary, and it denied us religious services. The jail denied us access to our families. We couldn't see our own lawyers. We were allowed out of our cell for a few minutes a day to use a shower or make a phone call. That was essentially it. We were kept in 7-foot cells. We were denied access to sunlight, basic nutrition. Our cells were full of black mold and what have you. But this is a result of course, again, the sort of precedent that was set with the COVID lockdowns and the restrictions. The jail was basically allowed to do whatever it wanted to us, and they did out of retaliation. Eventually, they dropped these policies for the entire jail except for us. This is even after DC as a whole stopped using these lockdowns. The second thing to realize is that, and there are other defendants who will corroborate this, other inmates from the jail. The guards there admitted they knew we would be in that jail weeks before January 6th. So they segregated us away from the rest of the jail. The main jail is called CDF. central detention facility. We were housed in CTF, central treatment facility. Treatment as if we were sick or we were in a nut house. And so they segregated us, and they planned to do it long before January 6th. This is out of the mouths of the guards, and there are other defendants who will corroborate this. I think that's important because I don't understand how the jail would know this unless there were other elements in DC, maybe Mayor Bowser or maybe elements in Congress who knew that they were going to be housing dissidents inside of Washington, DC. Another thing to really think about is the despair from the fact that you couldn't invoke your speedy trial right. I fought 16 months for a fair and speedy trial. There are some people today who say that they're being denied a trial. That's not true now. But at the time, it took me 16 months, a year and a half to get a trial when the Speedy Trial Act says you're supposed to be able to get one within 70 days. They intentionally postponed our trials so that they could force us into taking plea deals by crushing our souls and keeping us in solitary. It didn't work for me. Some people, I understand it did because they had wives and families. You know, I always say I'm a bit of a bum. I don't have a wife and I don't have kids, but a lot of the men I was locked up with, they do. And so it was really, I think, a torture tactic, keeping people in sensory deprivation and without access to their loved ones. Miles, keep in mind, often hundreds or thousands of miles away from their home states and families. These cases were exorbitant. As you know, thank you again for contributing to Patriot Freedom Project. The reason it's necessary is because a lot of these men were the breadwinners of their families. And by not being able to support their families, their wives would have to take up maybe 2-3 jobs to support their families. Even on top of that, the legal expenses, the trials, even if you're just negotiating a plea, a good lawyer is sometimes very expensive. And the public defender's office in Washington, D.C. is completely corrupt. The head of the public defender's office actually would tell defendants inside the jail that they were Klansmen, that they were racist, that they tried to steal her vote, and that essentially calling Trump supporters evil. So there was essentially it was pure despair. It was pure despair. And that's the legal aspect. We're not even getting into the fact that the jail itself staffed our pod, our wing of the jail. They staffed it with BLM supporters and people who hated President Trump. And a lot of them took, and I understand this, I'm just, they are human. A lot of them took January 6th very personally because they were local and they believed the narratives about us. Eventually they mellowed out, but for the first year at minimum, it was just pure torture. It was like living in it was like a gulag. It was, I always said, and not to mention about a third of the people in there, they filled the jail with informants posing as Trump supporters so that they could get information on our cases and sabotage us. So I always joke that it was a cross between an FBI field office and an insane asylum. It was like living in the Twilight Zone, honestly. It's pure violation of due process.
I mean, I'm almost gasping at how you set a wrong that is of this magnitude right, and whether there ever will be any kind of proper recognition at the very least of what happened. But above and beyond that, there need to be apologies, restitution. People need to be held accountable. I thought we would talk in the remaining time we have, which is not a lot, about these plea deals, because people don't understand what a plea deal is and how it works. Basically, what the government does is they have a technique which they apply to the guilty and innocent alike. And what they want to achieve at the end of it is they want the public to be able to point its incriminating finger and go, see, he admitted it. He himself says that he did it, right? But how do they get you to say that? How do they get you to sign on the dotted line? Talk about the process of how a plea works. Do they offer you a plea? How do they go about it?
They offered me a plea and I rejected it. I went to trial in very biased DC. I lost, of course, but it was a sword I had to fall on. There are different things to think about. One is that because of how biased DC is, you can almost be assured that you're going to be convicted of something. So DC is extremely biased. They hate Trump supporters. But what's even worse is that the prosecution will go out of its way to smear you, and it will use its organs in the media to write hit pieces about you. So you can be almost assured that the jury is going to be prejudiced against you even more than they normally would if you fight your case, if you resist. The second thing is that just by being deprived of your loved ones and resources, it's almost impossible to fight your case. The third is that getting into the pleas themselves, I don't know if this was the case for you, but I do believe that for the majority of January 6 plea deals, you waive your right to appeal. So you agree to a certain statement of facts and you waive your right to challenge those facts, more or less. You could argue it's under duress, and I agree that it is. But because of how I would say corrupt our system is, and because of how it prioritizes convictions over justice, you're going to get a mountain of people pleading guilty and not being able to say anything about it afterward. And I mean that's the bottom line. And there's another thing too to consider. I went to trial and I lost, sir. So Dinesh, when I went to trial, I actually testified in my defense, and because I got convicted, I was considered a liar for that. And so when they calculate your sentencing guidelines, your point system, you get a 3-point enhancement for defending yourself at trial, because it's a punishment for lying. But if you take a plea deal, you get a 3-point reduction in your sentence for accepting responsibility. So between going to trial and losing and taking a plea deal, that's a 6-point difference in how they calculate your sentences. That can result in a huge disparity in the time you spend behind bars. So there are a lot of things, a lot of different factors that someone has to really consider in terms of, how they're going to bear their cross. Are they going to take a plea deal and hopefully get less time, maybe see their family and loved ones sooner? Or are they going to, bite the bullet and spend years and years in court? I already finished my sentence. The one felony I had, that's the SCOTUS just tossed out, I'm still appealing it. It still has to be vacated. So here I am, still a felon for a crime that's not a felony. It's a long and arduous process, but it's necessary. And sir, I'll just say one last thing, if I may. There's a defendant. His name is Jay Johnston. He was a comedian. He actually was he was on the show Bob's Burgers. He's a known comedian, and he's going to be getting sentenced soon. And his wife made a painting of Donald Trump, and he signed it. And so we're trying to sell this painting for charity. And so if anybody is interested, they could go to patriotbidproject.com and put a bid in on that, so we can help support more families. This is a never-ending process, sir. I just want to reiterate, I'm so grateful for everything you've done, for the attention you brought to this, and your own personal generosity. They've arrested 1,500 people plus. They say they're going to get, they want to get a lot more before the election. And if they rig this again, they're going to keep doing it. There's going to be no end in sight. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to be with you, sir. Dinesh, you are a great American, and I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you.
Well, the website, guys, is patriotfreedomproject.com. So I urge you to check it out. You also mentioned, did you say Patriot Bid Project?
Patriot Bid Project. That's where the painting by Sarah Radonovich is being auctioned off. So if anybody has it in them, President Trump signed this painting. He was a very generous man himself. I'm extremely grateful. And again, I just want to reiterate, Dinesh, you were there from the very beginning, and we're never going to forget that. So extremely grateful. Thank you, sir.
Well, it means a lot. Guys, I've been talking to Tim Hale, Army veteran and comedian. Follow him on X at Lewis of Monmouth, Patriot Freedom Project, and patriotbidproject.com. Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and salemnow.com.